classic 1854 book that this very, very rich, evolving, complex, work in progress exhibition addresses. And just to frame this a little bit further, we've asked Eric Benjamins to spend about 5 minutes or so briefly introducing the project in a little more depth. Eric is a graduate student at the School of Museum of Fine Arts, part of our joint degree program between Tufts and the SMFA. He's an MFA candidate, and he spent 3 weeks this past July in living and working at this site called Mildred's Lane, this complex, this artist's complex that has been sort of transposed and overlain onto the Tufts Art Gallery. So, Eric, would you take us a little deeper?
Hey everyone. So this exhibition is a weird experiment that spawns from a place in rural Pennsylvania that Amy, and I'm sure you all have read, called Mildred's Lane, which is difficult to define. It is an art colony, it is a residency, it's an experimental school, it's a life experiment, it is an artwork, it is very odd and interesting and very provocative. So this exhibition is sort of using Thoreau and transcendentalist ideas and Walden sort of as a vehicle to explore, I feel, this identity of Mildred's Lane as an experimental school, a school that is based on organic principles, it's based on making a mess, experimentation, the unexpected, and it's also based on the domestic model. The domestic model meaning, you know, the home, comfort, who is close to you, you know, informality, things like that. So this exhibition is divided into 3 spaces. So what we're in now, as Amy said, is a parlor space salon, and the host of these, Lycia. And this first space, which is sort of the transforming, malleable home for these events, is sort of decorated with artifacts from the family of Mildred's Lane. So they are people that have sort of dabbled in this space and have contributed to the sort of evolution of this weird place in Pennsylvania. So, you know, myself as one of the fellows there, we have stuff on the walls, visiting artists, Mark and Morgan, the 2 artists that co-direct this space. So it's sort of like a Hall of Fame, but also it is a weird algorithmic exploration of the identity of Mildred's Lane through these artifacts. The second large part of the space is an architectural construction kit, essentially. So there are 2 construction kits in which we'll be putting together throughout the course of the exhibition. And we're having a barn raising, I think in a week or so, a week and a half, in which you are all invited, if you're interested, to help us construct, at least for one of the kits, a reimagining of Thoreau's house on Walden. So we'll be like cutting away and sawing and putting together and building this house. The second kit, which is the exact same amount and quantity and whatnot, is more of an experiment. It sort of really adopts the ethos of a place like Mildred's Lane, and up to experimentation and confusion and chance and play, we will build the second kit into something that more abstractly adopts the ideas of this exhibition. So it could be a house, it could not be, it could be a sculpture, it could not be, it could not even be built. So we'll see what happens. I hope it is built to some degree. And the final part of this space in the far corner is a tintype portrait studio. Tintypes are an old analog photographic wet plate process in which pieces of metal are coated with photographic emulsion and then exposed, usually in a portrait setting, and you get these beautiful objects. So this is a functioning portrait studio in which we will be photographing the variety of collaborators that help us with sort of the trajectory and the life of this exhibition. So there's a beautiful wall right to the left of that portrait space where there's tintypes that were taken of all the collaborators during the exhibition's run. So we hope to add to that wall. And those are these 3 elements of the exhibition. that are sort of exploring a complex relationship between the town and the country. So that's about it. Please enjoy. I'll be around if you have questions.
Thanks. Okay, simplicity, complexity. I already have given you 3 ideas that I asked you to think about a little bit on the way to arriving here tonight. And in one of them is embedded the idea of individuality and cooperative action. And I'm trying to tie in, okay, I took my homework assignment as trying to take the transcendentalist message, especially Thoreau and Walden, and relate it to what we do in PChem. And as you know, I'm obsessed with the idea that your PChem knowledge should span the range from pure theory to what you see around you every day. I should be able to do this, right? But the Mildred's Lane thing was not really fleshed out very well to me beforehand. So as I hear Eric talking, I still think that we can tie right into that. It sounds like this community they have at Mildred's Lane is an excellent example of what can be accomplished when the individual participates in cooperative action. And there's a special kind of energy that means lots of great things can happen. As you'll see, that is going to be one of the themes of what I have to say today. So if Michael would move to the next slide. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. I say let your affairs be as 2 or 3 and not 100 or 1,000. Instead of 1,000,000, count half a dozen and keep your accounts on your thumbnail. Next slide. These are some of the key segments of Walden that focus on the simplicity idea. Here, simplify, simplify. Instead of 3 meals a day, if it be necessary, eat but 1. Instead of 100 dishes, 5. And reduce other things in proportion. The nation itself, with all its so-called internal improvements, is just such an unwieldy and overgrown establishment, ruined by luxury and heedless expense, by want of calculation and a worthy aim, as the 1,000,000 households in the land. And the only cure for it, as for them, is a rigid economy, a stern and more than Spartan simplicity of life and elevation of purpose. Next slide. This quotation appears at the actual site of the cabin. You see those stones behind the sign. That's where the cabin actually existed. But the replica was conveniently located in the parking lot across the street, so it was almost at a drive-through Walden experience. If you don't want parking, you get out and walk down around the pond, the location of the actual place where Thoreau spent 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days. My purpose in going to Walden Pond was not to live cheaply or dearly there, but to transact some private business with the fewest obstacles. In short, I am convinced, both by faith and experience, that to maintain oneself on this earth is not a hardship, but a pastime, if we will live simply and wisely. Next slide, please. Every morning was a cheerful invitation to make my life of equal simplicity, and I may say innocence, with nature herself. This, I think, provides us a great segue into what those of us who study nature as scientists share with Thoreau in his view of simplicity and innocence of nature. So we move on to the next slide. Scientists since the Middle Ages have been guided by the principle we mentioned in class the other day, Occam's razor. Here's William of Ockham, 1288 to 1348. His razor is often expressed as the law of economy or the law of succinctness. The principle is popularly interpreted as the simple explanation is usually the correct one. When competing hypotheses are equal in other respects, the principle recommends selection of the hypothesis that introduces the fewest assumptions and postulates the fewest entities while still sufficiently answering the question. In the background, I don't know if you can kind of see in Latin, you can kind of make out the letters of his principle expressed in Latin. The actual words it translated in English is, entities must not be multiplied beyond necessity. So that's what the dark script indicates. Okay, on the next slide, we see the modern interpretation of that. This is pretty, there are many things that Einstein said that are pretty famous. This one is interesting. Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. This was actually removed from Wikipedia because of an argument over whether he really said that or he just said something like that. It gives me great pleasure to know that once in a while things are actually removed from Wikipedia. I was afraid that people just upload anything and there it is for those of us to innocents to stumble upon. Okay, this is called Einstein's razor. Okay, the next slide, I like to do a little bit of collaborative stuff when I talk to students on this subject, but because time is limited and I have a lot of slides, I decided I would give you some hints. So I'm going to ask you to name some of the great laws of science, and we have these three characters that might make you think of some of the things that I'm trying to list. So let's see if there are any volunteers. Yeah, Ben.
Is that Newton on the left?
That's Isaac Newton on the left.
And law of universal gravitation?
Law of universal gravitation, okay.
And
Anything else that you remember about Newton? Any laws of motion?
Body motion stays in motion.
Right, the body at rest stays at rest, okay. So those general principles, well, we'll get to those more in detail in a minute. Let's generate some other laws. Newton is an important figure in the discussion of simplicity versus complexity in the laws of nature.
I think the far right is Darwin
That's correct.
and his theory of evolution.
This theory of evolution. I'm focusing, the reason I gave these three characters is because of what their theories have to say about time. And there's a close connection between time and complexity in the way scientists understand the way the world has changed. Okay? Gallery over there. So, how would you express Charles Darwin's contribution in terms of temporal aspects?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay, I got more prompts coming up later. Anyone know the character in the middle? Probably the most highly relevant to the course that